Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell. You'll get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And when I'm not asking Bruce, hey, how big was Batista's? Well, you know. One of the things I like to do is help people save money. And if you're watching this video right now and you're in a 30-year loan, man, you're overpaying your single biggest bill and you may not even realize it. I want you to do a little experiment for me. Take your calculator out, multiply your monthly house payment by 360 payments. That's how many payments there are in a 30-year loan. That big scary number, that's your total of payments. You're looking at that number? You know you can do better. Keep more of your own money right now and go to savewithconrad.com. Or maybe you've got credit card debt. Man, it's not a matter of if I can save you money with that. Your average interest rate on a credit card is more than 20%. And by the way, all the interest you pay on those credit cards, it's not tax deductible. Whereas the mortgage interest, well, that is tax deductible. So if you owe this debt, it's up to you how to pay it back. Doesn't it make sense to get the cheapest rate possible and the greatest tax deduction possible? Find out how much money you can save right now for free at savewithconrad.com. You don't need perfect credit. Even scores in the 500s can be approved, and it's no cost out of pocket. But maybe best of all, we're licensed in more than 40 states. We can help more families than ever before. But how much can we save you? Find out right now for free with a quick quote from savewithconrad.com. Hey, it's Conrad Thompson, and you're listening to Grilling JR. What's going on, Jim Ross? How are you?
I'm good, man. I'm just trying to weather these storms rolling through Oklahoma. Just another day in the tornado belt.
Yeah, we get our fair share of those here in Alabama. But man, we tore a tornado through iTunes last week. We were the top-rated wrestling podcast in all the land last week. I think people were excited about our debut episode. What was the feedback you got?
Oh, it's overwhelming. It was heartwarming, actually. Really good. So I was very positive. I appreciate the fans listening and telling their friends we have a new show. And so here today we are at episode number 2 and ready to kick some more audio ass.
Well, I'm excited about it. If you missed it, tell a friend. The story of JR jumping ship from the WCW organization to the WWF is available now in the archives anywhere you enjoy podcasts. And any day now, I think it's already happened. The channel is now called Grilling JR, but you don't have to go anywhere else. If you've been listening to the Jim Ross Report here on Westwood One, it's the exact same feed. And we're excited to keep the train on the tracks today because we're talking about the curtain call. And this is one of the more critical moments in wrestling. A lot of things are going to change, and we're going to talk about what happened, what could have happened, what was supposed to happen, what wasn't supposed to happen. But it's a pretty interesting night for professional wrestling. May 16th, 1996, Madison Square Garden, New York City. And you told me off air a little bit of trivia about this particular garden show and yourself.
Yeah, when I went to work for Vince in 93, soon thereafter, after some of my exits and re-entries and so forth, he wanted me to, I started booking the cards, the matches at the live events. And he called me one time and he said, hey, JR, meet me at the office or meet me at home, someplace, something like that. And you can ride the garden with me. And I didn't know I was even going to the garden. So I said, oh, okay, you want me to go to the garden? That'll be good. He said, no, well, where do you want to go? So that told me all I needed to know right there, that I need to go to every garden show. And it was the right thing to do, quite frankly. I was just being, lazy. And, you work 8 or 10 hours a day, then you go to work another several hours at an event. It makes it for a long ass day. But my luck, if you want to call it luck, that day I had the flu, and I'd had the flu pretty much all week, hacking and coughing and sneezing. And anybody that knows the legends of the great Vince McMahon, you know that he's not a hacker or a cougher or a sneeze person. He don't do it, and he don't want to be around it. I've seen him curse himself violently when he sneezed. And if some new guy came to a meeting and they sneezed, everybody, they didn't look at the guy. They looked at Vince to see what he was going to do because they knew that he didn't approve of sneezing. So the sneezing rule got me out of going to the garden on that particular night. So ironically, even though I got a wealth of BS on this thing, information and so forth, I did not go to the garden that night, and I was not present for the curtain call, but subsequently after that event, I felt like I was there and probably should have been there in hindsight, based on what happened. So it was a strange day. It was all, easy. We had a good house. The card was strong, and the talent was over. And unlike a lot of the rosters currently, our roster actually sold out the Garden a few times. So in any event, I wasn't there, but boy, howdy, do I still have memories of it.
Let's talk a little bit about the Garden. You mentioned, that very early in your run there, you were told, well, why wouldn't you want to go to the Garden? And you understood that meant it was priority to Vince. Can you sort of put that in context for us, what the Garden meant to Vince and the McMahon family?
Well, it started with his grandfather, Jess McMahon, and then it just played it forward with his dad, Vincent J. McMahon. The irony of it's always been Vince Jr. and Vince Sr. Neither of them were Vince or seniors or juniors. They had different names. Kennedy for the current guru, and his dad was Vincent James McMahon. It was such a big part of their business, the foundation of their business. If you had success in Madison Square Garden, you had leverage in negotiating with all these other venues in the Northeast region of the United States. And the Garden was, and will always be the number one arena in the world. So if you make it there, you make it anywhere, as they say about New York and the Garden specifically here. So the family, it was just close to the family. It was a family tradition. It was a place where even Shane and Stephanie went when they were kids, would go over from time to time. So it was just a family thing, and it was big to the company. It was the backbone. It was the market, the number one market for WWF, and quite frankly, it still is. If you're in the entertainment business or you're in the sports business in New York, whether we like it or not, whatever, is a mecca, and it still is that way.
And I guess we should mention this was a Sunday show at Madison Square Garden, 18,800 fans in attendance, 16,564 paid. It is a full sellout. The card was the Bushwhackers defeating Marty Jannetty and Leif Cassidy, Savio Vega getting a win over Bob Backlund, Ahmed Johnson going to get a win over Davey Boy Smith by DQ when Owen Hart interferes. Steve Austin is going to pin Jake Roberts. The Ultimate Warrior is going to get a win over Owen Hart. Vader's going to pin Yokozuna. The Godwins would defeat Skip and Zip to win the tag titles. And then, of course, your two top matches, the ones that we're really here to talk about. Hunter Hearst Helmsley is going to pin Razor Ramon with the pedigree, and Shawn Michaels is going to get a win over Diesel in a steel cage match. Late in the bout, Davey Boy Smith briefly interferes and prevents the champion from escaping over the top. Moments later, as Diesel is still knocked out, Michaels is posing with the title belt. Razor Ramon comes out, hugs the champion, and raises his hand. Of course, these are our baby faces, our heroes. Michaels then revived Diesel, the bad guy, his opponent, and waved for someone else to join him in the ring. And then Hunter Hearst Helmsley appeared and hugged Michaels before all four men embraced and held each other in their arms. It's Kevin Nash's last match at Madison Square Garden for 7 years. And his last match in the WWE for 6 years. So that's directly from the history of WWE.com, but we're going to talk about, all the backstory of how it got here. And there's lots of twists and turns along the way. There's been tons of debate and discussion about when the Attitude Era officially started. Did it start with the Montreal Screwjob? Did it start with DX? Did it start with Austin and Mike Tyson the night after the Royal Rumble in 1998? I don't know that this is really the start of the Attitude Era, but it is certainly a shift in professional wrestling with knowing what's about to happen on the other channel with these two characters who are leaving the territory. There's about to be a major shift in professional wrestling. Is that fair to say? Absolutely. Yeah. And I don't know, it's arguable what started the Attitude Era. Conrad, everybody could make a story, a good case for several things, but everything you mentioned certainly would be a candidate, but without a doubt, the curtain call ushered in a new philosophy to some degree of wrestling. It was really that behind the scenes thing and pulling the curtain back and dropping the wall, et cetera, et cetera. It was just a
It was a different time in the business. And again, as we mentioned moments ago about the Garden, if it happened in, in all due respect, in Des Moines or Oklahoma City or someplace normal, Garden's not normal. It's the biggest thing in the business for wrestling or boxing or concerts or whatever. But nonetheless, it was the Garden, and that's what made it really so impactful to me. Is it happened in the biggest market in the country, in the biggest arena in the country, most famous, blah blah blah. So yeah, there's a good story to be made, I think, about when the Attitude Era started. I'm with you though. However, I didn't really perceive the curtain call of starting the Attitude Era, but I could see it contributing to the start of the Attitude Era.
And a lot of that is based around Kevin Nash and Scott Hall. So let's touch on that. Both of these guys become huge stars in the WWF, but before that happened, they were struggling down in WCW in 1991. And you were still there at the time. Of course, Kevin Nash was Steel, half of the Master Blasters tag team. And then he was Oz, and then he was Vinny Vegas, and Scott Hall was known as the Diamond Stud. When you were with these guys in WCW, you obviously got to know them on a more personal level. Maybe you guys weren't best of friends, but you knew them beyond their Oz character. You saw their size, you saw their ambition. Did you know that these guys were going to be big stars? They just didn't have the right packaging at the time.
I think I felt that because they had that luxury of size, Kevin's almost 7 feet, and Scott about 6'6", 6'7", I think at that time, somewhere in that neighborhood. They're big guys, and big guys turn promoters' heads. Big guys can walk through airports and get noticed, and believe it or not, that's one of the yardsticks I've heard promoters use time and time again. Well, if that guy walked through the airport, you sure as hell look at him. That kind of deal. So that was their, and both of them were. Scott Hall was a very accomplished worker, and really, really bright as far as the processes within the business. He understood the business very, very well, and had a good head for the finishes and things of that nature. Kevin, I met Kevin when he was working as a bouncer at like one of the strip clubs there. I think maybe the Cheetah. I'm not sure. But anyway, in Atlanta, where I frequented time to time, being unmarried, and I just, he was a big, good-looking guy, 7 feet tall. Again, he stands out, and so we got to talking, and then he got somebody else met him. I think maybe Jerry Briscoe or somebody met him as well. Got him hooked up with the WCW people, and so he could start training and still keep his job there at the club. So, but Kevin and I had a better relationship because than I did with Scott. And no particular reason other than Kevin was not on the road, and he could really talk. He was a great conversationalist. He was funny. He was glib, and he had that look. So consequently, when I started doing my radio show on WSB. And from time to time I'd bring in guests if they were local and so forth. He was one of my regular guests on my show, and I remember telling Dusty, I said, "Man, this guy can talk. He's really good." But so in other words, I was trying to convince anybody that would listen that he had a lot of potential, but Oz wasn't going to get it. And but I think Oz was also, ironically for Kevin, another failed attempt by WCW at that time to out WWE the WWE, and that ain't going to happen. So that was kind of the situation there, Conrad. I think both of them were solid guys in that regard, but I was much closer to Kevin than I was with Scott.
Well, Scott Hall comes in to the WWF as a heel in 1992, but quickly becomes one of the more popular characters in the company. He wins the Intercontinental title 4 times, which I believe was a record at the time. When Nash comes in, he has no trouble becoming a Triple Crown winner. He wins the Intercontinental title and then the tag titles with Shawn Michaels and even the world title. So come 1996, these guys are big stars. They're well-established main players, and behind the scenes, you've heard all the rumor and innuendo. They're half of the Clique, or I guess, 2/5. We round out the Clique with Shawn Michaels, Sean Waltman, and of course later Hunter Hearst Helmsley. And there's been talk that from time to time they'd hang out with Just Incredible or Aldo Montoya, PJ Walker, whatever you want to call him, and Louis Spicolli. We're going to do another episode another time about the Clique, I'm sure. But how was the office? Not Vince McMahon, not Bruce Pritchard, but JR, your office at the time. What was your impression of the Clique? Because they've been villainized over the years and people have pretty strong opinions. You love them or you hate them. And there's been lots of talk about, a special relationship that existed for whatever reason between Shawn Michaels and Vince McMahon. Were they a pain in your ass? Did you fall on the loved them or hated them side?
I liked them because they entertained me and they were good to me. They were respectful, believe it or not. Shawn and I had a relationship going back to his first territory when he worked for Cowboy, and Jose Lothario got Shawn a job for Mid-South. So I've known Shawn his entire career, literally. And of course, my relationship with Kevin, we had a lot in common, other than like looking at naked women. We also enjoyed sports. He's a great sports fan, played basketball, as you know, at the SEC and at Tennessee. So I never had any issues with these cats. And quite frankly, Shawn and Kevin were kind of the leaders of that deal, and maybe Kevin more than anybody. The other, Waltman got kind of adopted, talented son of a gun, as he is, got adopted by the group. Sometimes I think he would probably admit for their comedic entertainment, because they'd pass around the chocolate cake and then funny things would happen from time to time. So, but I never had any issues with him, Conrad. I no more issues than I would have normally with anybody else. Either a payoff's too low or they need a day off or whatever. Same old stuff. Normally when talents have issues, one of the two C's, almost invariably, the two C's are cash and creative. So when you hear about a wrestler having an issue, even today, especially today, it's generally about one of the two C's. So if they would have an issue about one of the two C's from time to time, I found out the way to tell them what's going on or what to communicate with them, better said, is be honest and upfront and cut to the chase. And don't BS them, because they're too good at BSers themselves that they saw it coming. So I didn't have major issues with them. My issues, I don't know if they're major, were the fact that they pissed off some other guys from time to time. And instead of the other guys going to and dealing with these guys, Shawn and his group, Hunter and all those cats, they just bitch about it. And so all those things do is linger and fester. So we try to address issues in that regard. But they weren't as bad to me as allegedly they were to other people.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because lots of other guys have come out in the shoot interview era of the late 90s and early 2000s, and they would, make no bones about the fact that they felt like their career wasn't what it could have been because the Clique had interfered. The Clique had went to the office and turned, Vince or JR or whoever against them. Do you remember there being a time where, a Kevin Nash or a Scott Hall came to you and said, "Hey, we don't like working with this guy. He's the shits. Take him off the card"?
Trying to think. There might have been eyebrow raised on some bookings here or there. But hey, here's the thing about those guys. They had a great feel for the business. I believed at that time that WWF needed to make some philosophical changes in our presentation. In other words, that we needed to, I thought, to get away from all these outlandish eye-rolling characters that basically cater to a youthful demo, which means that you're kind of turning your back on your male 18 to 34, 18 to 49 demo, which is not. Turn your back might be too strong a word, but it just, you weren't catering to them. You're catering to their children, their little brothers, their little sisters, whatever it may be. So I was always thinking that we need to change because, what's the old saying? You do the same thing over and over. Don't expect a different result. It's just going to be the same stuff, right?
The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result.
There you go. Thank you, Conrad. See there, kids, what you get for reading, go to school. So anyhow, that was kind of the deal, man. They had a good sense, a good pulse for where the business was. And it happened to coincide with what I believe was a necessary change, which would foster us, even though we didn't know the destination at the time, to the eventual Attitude Era. Being real, working on, accelerating real personalities into their TV character. People feel like they're not being worked as badly or as prominently. So they were what I was looking for in the sense of can we get a different attitude? And I think that's what they brought to the table. They saw the need for change, and they saw it because of their paychecks. They wanted to make bigger money and draw more people, and what we were doing, I don't know, was going to draw more people.
Let's fast forward here to March of 1996. Meltzer would report that while nothing is official, Scott Hall is expected to join WCW after his contract and legal commitments with the WWF end in late May. He would write, quote, "In a situation spoken of with some disdain by WWF CEO Vince McMahon, Scott Hall sent a telegram to McMahon on February 21st, officially giving his 90-day notice that he was leaving the company. On the same day, Hall was suspended by the WWF for 6 weeks for a reason theoretically having nothing to do with him giving notice, causing him to miss his scheduled appearances this past weekend. The suspension would take him a few days past WrestleMania, which Hall was no doubt counting on as his last big payday before leaving." Let's talk about that. There's lots to break down here. It's been no secret that he was unhappy with the WWF in recent months. He wasn't really pleased with the decision by creative to have him feud with Goldust. He vetoed that concept and seeing it through in favor of working with Hunter Hearst Helmsley or 1-2-3 Kid. He was also unhappy with the baby bottle and diaper angle leading into the pay-per-view. And he had some family pressure at home as well. And in the middle of all this, he's got an offer from WCW, and it's guaranteed money and allegedly an easier schedule as well. So if I'm going to be home more and I'm going to get to spend more time with my family and I'll have less road expenses, it can maybe repair some challenges I have at home, and I can make more money, and it's a win-win. That's sort of the narrative that's out there. You were there. What can you tell us?
I think you make a good case. It's honest and it's truthful. My only the issue of Scott leaving was not debatable to me. I thought that Scott had issues at home, and the schedule that we were utilizing at that time was very, very aggressive. And of course, you get into the same old deal. Fans talk, well, there's no off season. Okay, that off season thing is a little bit blown out of proportion in my view. And here's why: you got a great big roster. It's a matter of scheduling, and if you want somebody to have time off, then you just book it, and you figure it out, and you get and then creative that would raise hell because somebody wasn't available. But the bottom line is you couldn't run the horses too damn hard. You can't just run them till they drop, and that's kind of the situation we were in. So you make very valid points about Scott Hall's deal. I think of two things. One is he wanted to try to keep his family together, which was challenging for him with his lifestyle and the job that he had, the schedule that he kept, and he wanted to make more money. So here we go, back cash. It's one of the two C's again, cash this time, and some creative. I thought that the Scott Hall Goldust match would have been probably off the hook because both of them can work like crazy, and they match up well. And I thought that would have been a great match on the way to a Shawn match or a Hunter match or Kid match, whatever it may be. I don't know, but I thought that was probably a little bit. It didn't do Scott any favors because he didn't want to work with anybody but his buddies, seemingly. So I don't think that did him any favors in the locker room. But I certainly understand the fact of negotiating for a better deal financially and with more time at home, all those things you said. So I wasn't surprised that he was wanting to leave because, one thing about Scott's a very vocal guy, and he's a good communicator. So if he has something on his mind, you're gonna get it figured out. He's not one of those guys that beats around the bush. So I knew from talking to him that he wasn't happy because, again, the payroll, the payoffs. I was involved in that with Vince, and at that point in time, and it was hard. It was hard for all of us to, you couldn't create new money because the houses weren't drawing. We started drawing a little bit and started doing pretty good, but around that time. But I was not surprised whatsoever. I believe, quite frankly, to tell you the truth, Conrad, I believe in hindsight that Scott Hall made the right decision in going to WCW. And I believe that it was the smartest thing for him to do. I just believe that there was a better way of carrying that message. Looking back at it, that he knew what he wanted to do, and it seemed like we got when he sent the telegram to give Vince this notice, it could have been done in person the previous 2 or 3 days that same week. That wasn't done, and that was kind of annoying in that regard. But be that as it may, I think at the end of the day, whether the right procedures and protocol was used or not, he made the right call.
I guess we should mention that Meltzer would write, when the office crew returned after talking about from a tour, after booking Ramon in a strong position for the future, they had a telegram from him giving notice. So it feels like you guys were trying to, appease him and make him happy and acquiesce to his demands. And then he slides this in, but apparently that a lot of that stems from the idea that he earned less in 1995 than he did in 94. Meltzer would write, it's believed he earned $270,000 in 1995, well down from what he earned in 94, which was supposed to be more than $400,000. I mean, if the shoe was on the other foot, hypothetically, good old JR might be looking for a new deal too, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. Because it's about the money, and, we gave up our amateur status when we started taking a paycheck. So that don't count. We can't go to the Olympics anyway. I think that he made the right call, and damn right. I can, recently I can relate to that, because me signing with AEW was, along those same lines, as far as, moving to a new location and hanging your shingle on somebody else's, building, because a lot of it was about opportunity and the money. I think at that stage in Scott's career, money was the paramount thing. He had a young family, and again, somewhat dysfunctional at times. I think the time that has passed proved that out. But yeah, he made the right call, as I said earlier. It's just how he delivered the message probably could have been done a little bit more efficiently and a little bit more, I don't know if I want to say respectfully. I don't know if that's a right analogy or not, but that was the only thing I saw that probably was a little bit off kilter, was how he went about it.
Let's touch base briefly on what the original plan for WrestleMania 12 was. Of course, we know we got a Hollywood backlot brawl between Goldust and Roddy Piper, but the original plan, as it's written in the Observer, it's supposed to be live via satellite as part of the WrestleMania show. And it would theoretically take place in Miami on a downtrodden street. And it's going to be similar to the way they did the uncensored show for WCW, where you had a cutaway match for Dustin Rhodes and Blacktop Bully. So this Miami street fight was the original idea. Did that plan change once he gave notice, or did Scott Hall not want to do that prior to the notice?
Scott didn't want to work with Goldust. So at any environment, and again, that would have been a featured match at WrestleMania, which would probably got him a nice payday. Unfortunately, that didn't happen for him, and because he didn't want to work with Dustin. So again, and I don't think it really so much about him not wanting to work with Dustin. He didn't like Dustin. He may not have been enamored with the persona of the Goldust androgynous character, or however you want to describe him. But I think the main thing is that he still was hell bent on working with his friends. And I think maybe in the back of his mind, he knew that his days there may be numbered, because he's going to be trying to find another spot to go. His contract was going to come up for renewal. And there's a case to be made also that we had those, most of those contracts are no guaranteed to any degree. I think, $150 a night for, 6 or 10 nights. It's ridiculous, but that's everybody signed it, whether they liked it or not, because it was an opportunity. Most people just said, okay, what the hell? I'm going to be healthy. I'm going to work. I'm going to be a good soldier, and I'm going to make a lot of money here because I'm going to be on the road a lot. But you still got to draw houses. You still got to have an ass every 18 inches, and we weren't doing that very well. So, the roster just had gotten stale and mundane, and we had a ton of guys that found their comfort zone. They were in the WWE, WWF at the time, and man, how good is this? My lifelong dream. And they were almost marks for themselves, some of those guys. But the money wasn't there to what they wanted it to be and what they needed it to be. So that's where I think Scott I think it was all about the money at the end of the day, all about the money. and he knew that he couldn't force Vince's hand to make to make sure that Scott got booked with guys only the guys he wanted to. I never talked to the only other time I ever heard anybody. Stone Cold told me one time we booked him with at Vince's insistence with Mark Marrow in L.A. and that didn't go over well. And Steve didn't know who he was even working with. He got to the building, and he's working with Marrow, and then under Jack Lanza called me, and one of the agents. He said, "Our boy Stone Cold is pissed, JR." I said, "How come?" "Well, he didn't want to work with Marrow tonight." "Okay." "And what else?" "Well, you had him going on in the middle of the card so he could get on the road early to do TV." And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "He don't like that either." I said, "He don't like anything today, does he?" I said, "Okay, give me a second." So I rebooked the card, got Austin another opponent. He didn't work with Marrow, and he went on last. So I saw him at TV, and I said, "Look, Vince wanted you to work with Marrow. That wasn't my original idea. I'm not just passing a buck. If I was, I'd tell you." And so he didn't want to do that. And he said, "But the thing that stuck out to me was I worked my whole goddamn life to be able to close a show at a WWF event. And we're in the second biggest market in the nation. And you guys want me to go on in the middle of the card." And he said, "I'm going to close the show, period." So I said, "Sounds good to me. Just trying to be, help you out here." There was no big argument, but that was his contention. But in all the years I was there, other than Scott and Dustin and Steve and Mark Marrow, there was no issues in that respect. So it was kind of unusual. And Vince didn't take well to that stuff. And Vince, I know when he got the agent report about Steve and Marrow, he said, "What the hell happened to Marrow and Austin?" I said, "Well, Austin didn't want to work with him." So it's pretty simple. And he's becoming a massive star. And you mentioned earlier about Sean and Vince having a great relationship. Every owner/booker has, in the past, generally had a great relationship with their top stars. That's been an age-old deal. And I remember Watts bringing in top guys for booking meetings to help them book their program, their matches. So because Watts' theory was, if you get these guys can be a part of the problem and the solution more specifically, then all of a sudden you're going to be doing business with them a lot easier, a lot more smoothly. Let them be a part of the idea, and they'll execute it better. So that made sense to me. So that's kind of how that worked. It wasn't just acquiesce and kiss an ass with every talent that had an issue, but you got to pick your spots there, Conrad. The top guys they're going to be treated differently. This is not a democracy, and if you just think it's going to a wrestling locker room and everybody's treated the same, you're full of shit. It just didn't work that way.
Okay, Jim, we need to take a time out here to tell everybody that it can be a little frustrating, especially if you're in a hurry or running late, to find yourself at a railway crossing waiting for a train. And if the signals are going and the train's not even there yet, and you can feel a bit tempted to try and sneak across the tracks, well, don't ever. Trains are often going a lot faster than you expect them to be, and they can't stop. Even if the engineer hits the brakes right away, it can take them over a mile to stop that train. By that time, what used to be your car could just be a crushed hunk of metal. Mm-hmm. What used to be you, well, better not to think about that. The point is, you can't know how quickly the train will arrive. The train can't stop even if it sees you, and the result is disaster. So if the signals are on, the train is on its way, and you just need to remember one thing: stop. Trains can't. Scott Hall says he got the offer from WCW and signs a letter of intent with them. And that's when he gave the 90-day notice to the WWF. And to your point, WWF contracts were 1 year and they automatically rolled over if you didn't give a 90-day notice. Not necessarily saying that you were leaving, but right, stating that you didn't want your contract to roll over. And of course, Scott Hall had that same type of contract you alluded to. It's a 1 year deal that keeps rolling over, 10 matches a year, $150 a match. So your guarantee is only $1,500 a year. And Scott would say that he didn't want to leave. He just didn't want his contract to roll over, and he wanted to sit down and have a serious talk with Vince about money. And he felt like he was growing as a performer and more a part of the company, but his pay had started to plateau. So he goes to Vince and asks him what he needs to do to improve. Is it my in-ring work? Is it my mic work? And Vince said something like, no, you're one of the best we got. And Hall said, well, I'm just curious because my pay has started to plateau and I want to make the big money like the guys who preceded him. And Scott Hall flies to Connecticut for a meeting, and he says he went in prepared and that he told Vince that he looks at his merchandise statements, and if we move the decimal point over by one spot, would the McMahon family really notice? Because the Hall family really would notice. And Vince said, nope, I'm not going to do that. I give you the same deal I give Taker and Shawn and Kevin. Nope, not going to do it. And then he asked if he could have 4 or 5 weeks a year to go to Japan and get big paydays over there. Now, for some of our younger listeners who are listening to this, that is something that happened a long time ago with American stars, the Stan Hansens of the world, the Brodies of the world. They'd go over and make 10 grand a week or something for 10 weeks a year. And that adds up. And of course, Vince is having nothing to do with this. The idea is, Scott thinks he's worth $1 million a year. That's what he wanted to sit down and ask for. And he felt like if I can't get that, at least give me the opportunity to go work and in Japan and earn some big money there. And Vince shoots that down too. Are you privy to this meeting? Are you in the meeting? Do you just hear about it after the fact?
No, I'm privy to it. My role was not at that point in time was not clear. I think JJ was still involved too. JJ Dillon. And so I was very much aware of it. The theory pretty much in a nutshell is that Vince didn't want to bust the system up. He had a system that he felt like was working, and didn't want to change it. And the fact that he probably thought, I can't speak for Vince, but he probably thought that Scott was not worth $1 million. So $1 million is that's 19,000. I think it's 19,000 and change a week. So that's a lot of cash, and he just didn't want to change that situation. I think he'd probably been willing to get Scott a raise, but the issue of the guaranteed contracts is where that all came back to. If you're not going to do guaranteed contracts, you can't say, well, you're going to make this. Okay, then you got to write that down for me. You got to put that on paper because I don't believe you. And most wrestlers are distrustful and a little bit paranoid, and they don't trust, quote unquote, the office. So I think that's where that was. Well, Scott was more of an old school guy like that. He had a different mindset than Kevin did, because Scott had been around a lot longer and had been been in the game longer. But I think I was well aware of the meeting. It didn't go well, and I don't know that either guy, Vince or Scott, did themselves any great favors by having that meeting and it going the way it did, based on how things worked out.
I guess we should mention here that the news comes down about the failure when Scott Hall is at a spot show in New Jersey. Him and Undertaker are supposed to work twice on that show because Shawn and Diesel weren't there. So when Scott's in the back, Tony Garea comes up to him and says they wanted him to call the doctor, which he's always referred to as the piss doctor in Toronto. Hall called, but the doctor wasn't home, so he didn't answer. So Scott Hall goes back to getting dressed for the show, and Garea comes back to him and says, hey, they want you to leave the building. And Hall tells Garea that the results of the test, which were 6 weeks old, was supposed to be confidential. And he says to Garea, the results of my test before I do. And then he says, I guess they got my notice. So let's talk about this. Scott clearly feels like that if he had, failed the drug test, it's been insinuated over the years that it would have been for marijuana. And at the time, the company was not always taking a hard stance on that. But now magically, when they get the notice, he's suspended for 6 weeks. And this is an old test. And it's not like he just took the test. The test was 6 weeks old, and now he's suspended for 6 more weeks. You had to handle some of this, I'm sure. What really happened?
Well, he flunked the test. And I'm not so sure, Conrad, of how long. This is not like an episode of Law and Order SVU. We don't get the results back before commercial break on some of that stuff. Processes and procedures to get your results were not quite as obviously as advanced as they are now. So I don't really know if that 6 weeks is kind of normal. It seems like it was a lot more normal than people perceive it to be. It's obviously a lot of folks would rather write about a conspiracy and talk about that. And I can understand why. I mean, it's very coincidental in that regard. Is it too coincidental? I don't know. Maybe. But I do know that medically and officially he flunked a test. And then when the results came back, that's when the announcement was made. It coincided with him giving his notice. Some people you'll never convince some people that there were two different issues. I think a lot of people are going to be just always think, well, we screwed Scott Hall, and I certainly didn't perceive that to be the case. But obviously, when you flunk a test, there's got to be some penalty for it, and that was how that went down. So in 6 weeks, I don't think 6 weeks was the suspension was unyielding. I think it's kind of the normal deal. So I just don't think that it was I don't think it was a conspiracy. But again, it certainly has a lot of the components of one.
Of course, McMahon, as quoted in the Pro Wrestling Torch, is saying, "There's nothing I can do about that coincidence. People will draw their own conclusions, and there's nothing I can do about that. I'm a sitting duck. Anyone can say anything they want about it, but one thing is for sure, no one has anything to worry about if they don't test positive."
That pretty well takes care of business right there. He's right about that.
Sure,
he's right about both those statements. Now, again, you go back, but was he telling the truth? I am under the impression, all I remember is that there was a failed drug test, and I believe it was for marijuana, but I can't remember that far back. I can't imagine it being anything else, which, if you think about it, is somewhat ludicrous. I think some of these marijuana tests are done just for political correctness now by companies, and they're worried, they're scared of their shadow about what their public image is going to be, without knowing that you're a goddamn wrestling show. It's always the professional wrestling shows are going to have a certain image and certain baggage that travels along with them, and there ain't a damn thing you can do about it. But I think that it was unfortunate how it worked out, but it certainly loaded the wagon on Scott and made the company look bad. And but all I can tell you from my experience, there was a flunk drug test, and as protocol would have it, procedures would have it, generally the 6 week penalty is normal. And as soon as you can get them off the road and start and the reason for that was you want to start the suspension early, so you get them back earlier. You wait several weeks and all of a sudden you got more time to add on or set them at home. It's not a good thing. So that's kind of where I see that thing. I don't believe it was a conspiracy. But I'm not going to make an argument or argue with anybody that does, because there are a lot of elements there that would cause one to raise an eyebrow.
Let's keep it going here. I do want to mention that, as luck may have it, Kevin Nash has his contract expire 6 days apart from Scott Hall. So let's switch gears to Kevin Nash. Meltzer would report in early March, Kevin Nash officially gave notice that he would be leaving the World Wrestling Federation to accept an offer from WCW in a phone call to Vince McMahon at 10:50 a.m. on March 5th.
Now, here's how I guess ask this question.
Thank you.
Who the hell knew? How did Meltzer know the phone call came at 10:50 a.m.?
I've always been fascinated by that. So here's the answer. Here's my question to you: who was the stooge?
I don't know. I don't know that. I remember Vince telling me and others, I'm sure, that Kevin Nash was giving his notice, had given his notice, and was going to leave. And look, it wasn't, you had to be the valedictorian of the Sherlock Holmes detective school to figure out if you're leaving WWE and you make a living as a pro wrestler, the only other place you can go to make the money you seek is WCW and the Turner money. So that was a layup. So we knew that was his destination, but his contract was coming up. There's nothing we could do about it. And I'm sure if Kevin sat down with Vince to look at a new deal, he's going to want somewhere in that $1 million range. And we had a lot of guys, established guys in the roster that were main event guys. At that time, I don't think Taker even made $1 million a year. I don't think Shawn Michaels' contract was guaranteed for $1 million a year. So they were asking for something that, and as I recall, Conrad, that didn't even exist. So we're breaking all kinds of things and ceilings and all the stuff. So I don't know. Kevin was a very monetary dude. Kevin plays the stock market. He's very well read. He's intelligent. Kevin's motivation was money, and I'm sure he would tell you that. Also, he wanted to have more influence in his creative, et cetera, et cetera. But I always felt like he had the relationship with Vince, that he had influence on how he was booked and the creative that he did and who he worked with at the big shows, et cetera, et cetera. So I thought that would have been kind of a week out. So I think it comes back to one thing: cash, and the cash for a guy that was at the top of the card, the champion, a Triple Crown winner, who's 7 feet tall and could talk. He was sitting in a wonderful spot, and as it worked out, he cashed in on that spot.
I guess we should mention here that the report in the Observer is that Nash is going to be taking a 3-year deal from WCW, ranging from $450 to $750, depending on who you believe. The notice, of course, comes less than 2 weeks after Scott Hall gave his notice. And Nash says that the motivation for this came from a conversation with Scott Hall, where it was said that he was making above Sting money. And Nash says that amongst the boys, Sting money was a phrase. Did you ever hear about Sting money?
Of course. Yeah. He was a top paid guy there, in WCW, for a good while, many years. He was the it guy. Sting was, and deserved it, quite frankly. Sting was probably the only, I can't think of another star that WCW actually developed that had the tenure and the impact that Steve Borden did as Sting. So he got top bred, and I'm sure Flair was in that same conversation when they were there at the same time. But yeah, Sting money was just a slang that meant, I'm getting paid as much as anybody else in the company, and that's what those guys wanted.
Nash says at first he didn't want to leave the company because he was loyal to Vince, because Vince was the first guy who really believed in him as a wrestler. The previous incarnations in his life being things like Vinny Vegas and Oz. So he tells McMahon, hey, if you're willing to match the offer, I'll stay. And McMahon refuses because Vince says, if I do that for you, then I've got to do that for all the other wrestlers. And we just are not in the financial position to do that.
A true statement.
Okay.
Absolute true statement, Conrad. The precedent of guaranteeing that level of money based on where we were financially in the company, people got to understand that in the mid '90s there, many of us that worked in WWF took massive pay cuts. I got my pay cut $50,000 a year, I believe it was. In a little meeting I had with Vince and the HR lady, Lisa Wolf, so aptly named, but nonetheless, I had a meeting that lasted 5 minutes. I'm asking all the wrestling people to take a cut and pay, and I'm asking you to do the same thing. But if you stay with me, you won't regret it. I'll make it up to you. Without anything written down or guaranteed, not even a handshake, just his word. And that's how that worked out. And then he also said, by the way, and if JR, if you want to leave, I won't hold you to your contract. I understand. You got to, this is not what you signed on for. And I was willing to, me and Jan and I were there, and we were, well, Jan wasn't there yet. She was still kind of in limbo with me, but we were working on it. But nonetheless, that's kind of where that was, everybody got it. And that's what prompted JJ to leave. And cause JJ had a big nut, a special needs child, young children, young wife, a lot of obligations. Cause there's no finer guy that I ever worked with in wrestling than JJ Dillon. Honest, loyal, but he needed the money for his care of his kids. And when he got cut in pay, that just crippled him. So, he left. I remember he left. Bruce and I were in South Africa doing a show. And so that's kind of where we are there, Conrad. I think, these Kevin and Kevin's motivation was the cash. And Vince could not upset and blow up the entire infrastructure based on our revenues. This wasn't going to happen.
Let's talk about the other piece. You said a minute ago it was all about the 2 C's, the cash and the creative. So he knows he's got this money offer. He knows he's got a guarantee. He doesn't really want to take it. We get to the February 96 pay-per-view. In Your House, Rage in the Cage. And Kevin Nash, as Diesel, of course, is challenging Bret Hart for the world title in a cage match. And during the planning of the match, Nash said the finish was he was going to hit Bret with the jackknife powerbomb, and then Undertaker was going to come from under the ring and pull Diesel back under with him. And as that happened, Bret would escape the cage and win the match. Doing the finish this way would add a lot of heat to Diesel and Undertaker at WrestleMania 12, because it would look like Undertaker cost Diesel the world title, just as Diesel had cost Undertaker the world title the prior month at Royal Rumble. But Nash said Bret didn't want to do it that way. And Nash has been on record saying the Undertaker got mad when Bret was speaking up about the finish and said something like, "Motherfucker, everything isn't about you." Bret, of course, took it to Vince. Vince sides with his champion, Bret. They don't do the power bomb as Nash wanted to do. And after the match, he's still upset about Vince siding with Bret. So Kevin Nash goes to Scott Hall and says, "I'm fucking coming." Do you remember there being some sort of pushback about the finish at the February pay-per-view?
Yeah, I do. And I also remember talking to Kevin. I don't know if they used it in this match or not. I said, "Kevin, is the quick one, the old Pat Patterson quick one, can be applied here." And I said something as simple as an inside cradle, or small package that we could call. I said, could be something like that. He said, "Well, people believe." I said, "Yeah, Kevin, it's a real hold." See, Kevin was a basketball player. He wasn't an amateur wrestler. And, if you were talking to an amateur wrestler, they know that those type maneuvers are legitimate pinning combinations. And it's logical if you understand the basis of that. But I remember talking to him about that, and he came around and he understood it. He just had to have communication. He was so he's so intelligent, big IQ, that he could read through the BS and clear out the smoke and see what's really there. And that's why I got along with him. I didn't BS him. We had a good relationship. We enjoyed each other's company more often than not. And, he was entertaining to me, and I just, but he didn't have that. He didn't have the product knowledge at that time that Scott Hall did. Scott had been around longer, had more miles on the journey than Kevin. Not to say that Kevin didn't catch up and arguably surpass Scott or anybody else around with with his booking beliefs and philosophies. But yeah, there were some little concerns about that. See, that all stems back from, Bret and Shawn not getting along all the time and having a little rivalry and all that stuff. And maybe little rivalries is an understatement, but I still think that I think the guys in the clique kind of perceived Bret as the enemy. And to some degree, he was not on their team. So that's kind of where I looked at that thing, Conrad. It was a political issue that was based on creative issues. Now, not the C, one other C, creative, and they didn't see eye to eye philosophically. And quite frankly, Bret had some very valid reasons for whether taking a jackknife powerbomb was one or not. I don't think, but there had to be a good reason behind it. So normally Bret's pushback was based on his guts and his experience in the business. And some guys, there's a lot of different philosophies. Are you a fastball pitcher? Are you a jump pitcher? Are you a breaking ball pitcher? What are you? Everybody's got something that brought him to the game, that got him in the game, and Bret's knowledge of that was one of the things that got him there. And he had strong beliefs of his philosophy of the wrestling business. And to be honest with you, I don't quite frankly, disagree with any of the things that Brett said about the philosophies of wrestling. He's very, very bright and very solid fundamentally. He grew up in that atmosphere when business was more straightforward and more simplistic. So it was always a little issues there, and that one kind of manifests itself. I didn't know that the Undertaker had made that statement in that closed door meeting regarding Brett. I can see frustration seeping in and that happening, but I never knew Undertaker and Brett to have any issues whatsoever. This is news to me on this day.
Let's talk about a conversation that Nash had with Vince. Allegedly, before he signs, he catches Vince in front of the building one day and says, "Hey, I don't want to leave, but my wife is 6.5 months pregnant, and I don't know if I'm going to be able to pay my bills day to day or week to week because my year is dependent on my WrestleMania payday. If it's a strong year, it's because it was a strong WrestleMania payday. But if it's not, then we got to figure something else out." And Nash tells Vince the number that WCW had offered. And he said, "I don't want you to, necessarily match the money. You just need to guarantee a certain portion of it." And WCW, according to Nash at the time, is offering him $800,000, and Vince doesn't want to even come close to a guarantee like that. This is actually working in both his and Scott Hall's favor, because Scott Hall allegedly is one of the first guys to negotiate a favored nations clause in his contract. So behind the scenes, Scott Hall is pushing WCW, "Hey, offer him a little more money and he'll come," with the idea being, if Nash comes in at a bigger dollar figure, Scott Hall's money will be bumped up as well. Of course, that's the way it winds up happening. It's decided WWF can't compete with that. So, Nash puts over Undertaker at WrestleMania, and then he puts over Shawn at one last pay-per-view. And supposedly Vince asked him to lose to the Ultimate Warrior on Monday Night Raw, and Kevin Nash agreed to take care of business with the Undertaker and Shawn Michaels, but did not want to do a match with the Ultimate Warrior on Raw. And ultimately that didn't happen. Do you remember hearing about this favored nations business, the conversation that Nash had with Vince about the WrestleMania payday, meaning whether it was a good year or a bad year, and anything you can offer about the Ultimate Warrior rumor and innuendo?
I think Conrad, that the two wins for Undertaker and Shawn were normal booking and logical, and I think that's why Kevin had great respect for the Undertaker, as everybody does, and of course Shawn was his best friend, so those were no brainers, and you knew that because of the competitive spirit of being a Division I athlete that Kevin had in his background, he would not. It's not his style to call it in a match against two guys like that. And Kevin was more of an attraction than a great, tactician. He wasn't Bret Hart hole for hole kind of guy. He was an attraction at his size and look and so forth. But I can tell you that I don't know that I don't remember anybody running to the front of the line to want to work with Warrior. He was horrible. He had great charisma. He had the body, as we know, but mechanically, he wasn't. We had a lot of guys on the roster that were better than a Warrior. They just didn't look like the Warrior. They didn't have his charisma. And the fact that Hulk Hogan passed the torch to Warrior there in Toronto at WrestleMania was huge. Warrior's stardom would not have been nearly as bright and vivid if he had not gotten the rub from Hogan and pinned Hogan in the Sky Dome in Toronto, in my opinion. But he was not a real smooth worker. He didn't work on his game. He worked on his look. And so he was a whole lot of sizzle and not a whole lot of steak. And I'm sure that's going to piss off some Ultimate Warrior fans. I'm not doing it to incite you. I'm just saying, in my opinion, of being around the business for all these years, he was not a very skilled in-ring performer. He was an attraction, and simple as that. The less you see him, the more he's going to mean. and but he wasn't a highly skilled wrestler. And a lot of guys thought that our attempt to resurrect the image of the Ultimate Warrior was a futile attempt. And I could not agree with them more. I didn't think there was anything left in that regard. But Vince loved the character. I think he got along with Jim Hellwig, the Ultimate Warrior, well. Or at least he seemed like he did. Because I remember one time that of course, Jim Cornette was along, and that's always an adventure on an airplane. But Vince and Linda and Cornette and me, and I can't remember who else was on the group, we stopped in Phoenix on the way to California to visit with Warrior. And that might have been the going into WrestleMania 12, somewhere in that neighborhood, to talk to him about the match and getting back on the road. And there's all these stipulations and got to have this, got to have that. I mean, it became got to have a private dressing room. And one of the first things I did when I got there in that role was to eliminate all the private dressing rooms. I thought it was a great way to alienate people and unnecessarily. But the thing that stuck out to me was that Warrior used the F-bomb in front of Linda, and everybody there read over and over and over, almost like to try to incite a reaction, because it didn't speak great of his vocabulary or his intellect. He did have a good vocabulary, and he was a smart guy. But boy, I just thought, man, this is what we're bringing into our locker room. And in my role, you got to look at that. Yeah, if he was back in the heyday, he could help us. But with that horse had left the barn, man. That horse had left the barn, and we were trying to, it was a desperate time. Can we get something in here that's going to get hot real quicker than not? And Warrior's availability was there, his track record was there, but the ship had sailed. And I don't blame Kevin whatsoever for not wanting to work with Warrior. And I'm not trying to speak ill of the deceased. He just was a very unique cat and not well liked by a lot of people.
Okay, JR, I know it's summertime. That means you're getting that pool ready, getting that backyard in shape. I've been seeing that online. And the only thing more annoying than, commercial breaks during Raw, well, it's flies and other insects invading your home. And who knows where those flies were last? That fly that just landed on your hamburger could have been anywhere.
That son of a...
Another piece of food, or, well, you know where flies go. Think about where else he could have been. And we want to thank our sponsors over at Dynatrap. You see, Dynatrap is the leading manufacturer of outdoor mosquito and insect traps. And now they've come up with a solution for indoor pests, the Dynatrap Fly Light. And the Dynatrap Fly Light works day and night to attract and trap flies, fruit flies, and mosquitoes, and all the other pesky insects. And I've got to say, it really works. This time of year, when it starts to warm up here at my house in Alabama, I get like a ton of ladybugs on my screen porch, and somehow they found their way in my master bathroom. I plugged this dude in my screen porch and in my master bathroom. No more of those flying ladybugs. Forget those disgusting fly strips. This Dynatrap Fly Light looks like a subtle night light, and it plugs into any indoor outlet. Trust me, I've been using this thing for a couple of weeks now, and it's insane the number of insects it has caught that would have otherwise been buzzing around my home. I've even got one in my garage. Get yours at Dynatrap.com. That's Dynatrap.com. Just enter our promo code to receive an additional 15% off. That promo code is JR. Dynatrap is the safe, silent, and simple solution to household insect control. And Jim, you've got a Dynatrap at your house. What are you thinking so far?
I love it because I do a lot of cooking out in my little outdoor kitchen, Conrad. And, the aroma, my delicious aroma of my food, it's like Guy Fieri or somebody. But that can be a pain in the ass, these bugs. And boy, this works. Simple as that. When you find out that we're advertising something or endorsing something, it's not just for a payday. We'd like the payday. But if it doesn't work, we're damn sure not going to try to sell you on it. So these products work. It's great if you're outside grilling or cooking. You got family. My granddaughters come over. We ain't got to worry about the damn annoying bugs. So, and you're right, Conrad. They're more annoying than a commercial break during a main event match on Monday Night Raw.
So what are you waiting for? Go to Dynatrap.com right now and use our special promo code JR. That's going to get you an extra 15% off of any of their products at Dynatrap.com. That's DYNATRAP.com, Dynatrap.com. Check it out. You'll be glad you did. And don't forget that promo code JR. Well, the WrestleMania show comes and goes. Scott Hall's not on it. He was supposed to be in there with Goldust. He doesn't want to, so that's a wrap. Roddy Piper takes the spot instead. Undertaker gets a win over Diesel in about 17 minutes. And Kevin Nash is paid $150,000 for that match, according to Jim Cornette. And allegedly Jim Cornette was like, why the fuck are you paying him $150,000? And Vince explains, I don't want Kevin to be able to say that I screwed him on the way out. Does that sound like a Vince McMahonism? Absolutely.
Yeah. And here's the other thing about that $150,000. You know, Corny made it sound like, and he wasn't involved in it, this particular aspect of it. He made it sound like, you know, he got $150,000 just to, as hush money or whatever. I'm saying that his payday, that's what his payday was. I mean, that day, I don't know that we gave Kevin any extra money above and beyond what he would normally receive in the payday, than he got.
I'm not implying that Cornette necessarily wanted to do that, but it's fair to say that a lot of times when a wrestler's leaving a promotion, the promoter tries to find a way to short him any way he can. I mean, that's certainly been the precedent that's been set in wrestling for years and years, is it not?
Yes, unfortunately it has been. I'll say this for Vince, and he and I have had plenty, as everybody knows, plenty of disagreements, but plenty of the other side of the coin too. That's just not his style, in that regard. In other words, he's more apt to give you more money so you can say, man, look what I'm leaving, as opposed to, the hush money type thing. So I think it's probably just a normal deal. And Kevin made a hell of a payday that day, but he was in a big match at WrestleMania. So, getting $150,000 payday at WrestleMania is not a rare occurrence. When I know that I've written down 7 figures for talents at WrestleMania before, getting $150,000 is not, a ground setting thing.
Let's talk about good friends, better enemies. It's the last pay-per-view in the WWF for these guys. Vader's going to pin Razor Ramon. Shawn Michaels is going to pin Diesel. And I guess we should just fast forward. We're here. It's the curtain call. Mm-hmm. As we mentioned earlier, May 19th, 1996, the gate is, $328,000. Hall and Nash both say it's the biggest non-pay-per-view show that the WWF ever did in Madison Square Garden up to that point. Does that check out for you? Is it the biggest gate non-pay-per-view wise in the history of the company at that point?
It sounds plausible. The ticket prices had increased as time went on, like everything else in our lives. So the tickets were a little bit were lofty and healthy, and there were not any empty seats. So yeah, it was good. The roster delivered, and as they delivered most every night, that group of guys.
So Nash says on the way to the show that day, Scott looked at him and said, "This is the last time we're going to be at the Garden. Let's work this motherfucker stoned." And Kevin Nash hadn't been stoned in 3 years, which sounds crazy, but you have to appreciate they've been drug tested the whole time they're here. So,
all right.
He says, when I walked in the door the day I left, there wasn't a fucker taking steroids and nobody was smoking pot. Booze and pills you could get from a doctor, and alcohol's legal, but you couldn't have anything illegal. So on the ride in, when he says, "Hey, we should do this match stoned," it at least crosses their mind. That night, Razor is going to wrestle Hunter Hearst Helmsley, the semi-main, as we said. The finish is supposed to be where Pat wants Triple H to jump Razor from behind while Razor is giving Tony Chimmel his chains, and Razor would give his chains to someone before the match. And then he wants Triple H to beat him up, throw him outside, choke him with some ringside cables, and then leave him laying in the aisleway. And he's going to go back in the ring, get on the mic and say, "Go wherever you're going, Razor Ramon." And as he's laying there, the fans are saying things to him like, "Look how they're treating you, Razor, after all you've done. Go to Atlanta and get the money." Obviously, the finish is going to come. But afterwards he picks up the mic and he says, instead of say hello to the bad guy, say goodbye to the bad guy. And the fans are chanting, "You sold out, you sold out." And he points to the curtain where he knows Vince is standing. and is telling fans, you tell him to give me the money and I'll stay right here. So the fans are sort of in on this. This is before the internet is what it is now. How is it out there at this point to where so many fans knew? Is it just because New York is a smart market and they were reading the quote unquote dirt sheets?
I think so. If Meltzer wrote a story, you had a lot of people that would pick up on it. Either they were subscribing to the Observer, or they were getting a copy of it, or it was being shared by somebody. But that's a very tight little group of fans. Pardon me. And so that's the only way I could tell you that it got out there. It was simply word of mouth after, and if Meltzer was writing about it, and he was, then the other journalists were doing the same thing. Because a lot of those guys, Meltzer was always the lead bull in that situation, and a lot of guys just followed what he said, to either to disagree or to try to steal the thunder. So the bottom line here is that the word got out, the word traveled fast. It was big news, and that whole wrestling war scenario was getting more prominent, and the fans were eating it up. They realized that competition is good for everybody, makes everybody get better at what they do. I still believe that to be true today, quite frankly. So, it was just a situation where that night after that, right after those matches, that's when the thing started to disintegrate. Pardon me. Right after those matches that we talked about, those main events, that's when things started to implode. And on that night, and the residual of the curtain call would then be something that we'd be talking about all these years later, because it was that big a news within our world. It wasn't big news, and I'm sure Dan Rather didn't give a shit. but I think our fans did, because it was big news. So that's kind of how it got out there, and then quite frankly, I don't know that we did a good job. We did a great job of suppressing it going forward. It's the Dr. Yankum thing, and moving to diesel, all that crazy shit that we did. We just embellished the whole process and made no money in the process of doing it. It was more of a revenge storyline than it was, are we going to draw money? We didn't draw a damn dime with the fake racer diesel.
We'll get there.
Yeah, I know we will, but I'm just saying is that this whole thing went to hell right after when all those guys came back to the ring. That's when things really started unraveling.
Scott Hall has said that for the weeks leading to this MSG show, Vince never sold the fact that Scott was leaving. He never tried to talk to him, never tried to work things out. But when he comes back through the curtain after his match with Hunter Hearst Helmsley, Vince calls him into his office. And when he gets there, he says, listen, you still work for me. Let's work something out. And Hall said, well, I told Bischoff I'm coming. It's a little late now. And he said he wanted to stay, that he loved that place. And he's talking to Vince, and Shawn Michaels walks in, and Shawn asked Vince, do you mind if Razor and Triple H come out after my match? And that's when it was agreed upon that it's going to happen. Kevin Nash tells the story a little differently than how the curtain call came to be. He says that Shawn and Razor went to Vince and asked if they could do it because they didn't want Triple H to get any heat, and Vince had no problem with it. And Nash said, originally we were supposed to go with Vince to Smith and Walensky's and have steak and wine. That's the plan. So Shawn walks in and says to Vince, I want to do this with my boys tonight. And Vince, as always Vince does, says, Shawn, how important is this? Is it that important? And Shawn says, yes. And Vince says, well, just do it. So it was without malice that they did it, according to Kevin Nash. I guess we should mention, as we said, Shawn Michaels beats Diesel in a cage match that night to retain the world title. After the match, just as we said, Razor and Triple H come to the ring. They all hug. They go to the four corners of the ring to celebrate. And this is the curtain call. And some fan snuck a video cassette recorder, a VHS, in, I guess, through his jacket or his pants or whatever. And he's shooting this from the crowd, and that footage would leak out, and it would become a underground tape trading, collector nightmare or dream because it's not the best looking footage, but it is cool to see something that otherwise we wouldn't have seen. Nash says he remembers Davey Boy going up to Vince and saying something like, "What the fuck was that? These guys are going down south and you're going to let them kill the garden off." And Nash said it just steamrolled from there, where as soon as they get back through the curtain, Vince didn't turn his back to Nash, but he turned just enough to signify like, "I'm fucking over this." And Nash said that they did this because they loved each other and everybody had each other's back. And everybody likes to use the word organic, but that's what this really was. It wasn't preconceived. It wasn't a work. It was four guys who loved each other saying goodbye. And Sean said it was talked about when they went on the European tour, but it was never talked about again, as far as he knew. There's lots of old timers who took issue with this. You know, the Jim Cornettes of the world are not happy about the curtain call. He describes a scene where, you know, people are throwing shit. He even says, "I was throwing my fucking suit bag down the goddamn Madison Square Garden hallway. I assume everybody knows what the curtain call is. I don't need to get into it." Jerry Briscoe was walking around kicking fucking walls. He wanted to get out there and stretch them as soon as they came back. Everyone was fucking hot because what it was. They took a shit on Vince McMahon's dining room table, the guy who was paying them. The Madison Square Garden show was to his father and to him, his dining room. At the time, that was the yardstick that people measured their success in the business. And they had their little Billionaire Boys Tree Club go out and expose the business and do a big fucking circle jerk. And who was Vince McMahon going to discipline? It was Kevin Nash's last night. It was Scott Hall's last night, and Shawn Michaels was the champion. So you hear about this, I'm sure. Do you get a phone call? Do you hear about it the next day? Carry me through what you heard happened.
I think, I'm trying to think, maybe Jerry Briscoe called me and I thought he was ribbing. I said, "No, they didn't do that. Come on." "No, they did. Here's what happened." And he told me, and it was like, I was taken aback. Cause I wasn't a part of the plan or the discussion of, the curtain call. So, and I wasn't there because I had the flu, but the bottom line was that, you know, it had not crossed my radar, leading into that event. So, I was completely caught off guard in that regard. And I found it to be offensive as hell until you find out that they'd talked to Vince about it. And so one thing, I understand the passion that a guy like, and two guys I respect a great deal, Cornette and Briscoe, and what they said, you know, I'm sure they were not aware either. I don't think that Vince had signed off on this damn thing. So, that's what's always been a point of contention for me, is that there was so much outrage. But if you're going to be outrageous about this, you really should go talk to the boss, because he checked the box if they could do it. So when that happened, I think I'm looking at kind of all bets were kind of half-ass off at that point in time. So, and I don't think that I still to this very day, Conrad, don't believe that those guys did that to show that Vince is keister. I think they did it to show that they have solidarity, that they have unity, that we're going to break the mold of what the boys used to be. Just, you know, as Bret Hart said one time, in the old days, wrestlers were booked like circus animals. They didn't want to be a circus animal in their view any longer. And they're going to make a statement that we're going to make some changes by, you know, our philosophy and things of this nature. So, oh hell, God, it was a rough night, because when you get that phone call, I'm feeling bad anyway. Now you don't sleep a damn wink because you're just waiting for the other shoe to drop. And you know, the last thing I wanted to do is to bring that up to Vince. That, "Oh, I'm sorry I didn't go to the garden. I had the flu." But, you know, he knew I wasn't going, and I wish I'd have been there to help you out on this deal, but there was no help to do. He signed off on it. Yeah. If the talents had gone into business for themselves, without the clearance from the head honcho, then that's a different matter. As it's played out, not really that much, not that big a deal. And again, I think it opened everybody's eyes of what we might be able to accomplish. They captivated the audience that night. They struck a chord. They found something the audience was going to really react to, in a very emotional way. So the audience made that emotional investment in these cats in the garden, and it closes. That's the last memory of the garden that night. That's the last thing they saw. So it was bold, but it was orchestrated bold.
Bruce Pritchard has said that he felt it was unprofessional and the slap in the face to Vince and the McMahon family, and he personally felt it was disgraceful. He also said it was an FU to Vince. He said he felt it was stupid for Shawn and Hunter to do because they're staying. And Bruce believes that Shawn did ask Vince, but he feels that Vince was sort of half listening and didn't really understand what they were going to do. And Bruce doesn't believe that Shawn actually laid out specifically what they were going to do. And of course, Vince McMahon is even on record as saying it was a cool moment, and it was a cool moment for those in the audience who knew. It wasn't a cool moment for me when I saw that because I really didn't know what I was looking at. So I was upset, and there were other individuals upset. And Shawn would say, it wasn't done to stick anybody in the eye. It was just friends expressing their care for one another. But as a wise guy once told me, it isn't show friends, it's show business. And Jim Cornette is super hot about it. And he says he would have fired Triple H because he was an underneath guy who wasn't getting over, and he would have taken the title off of Shawn. And
God damn it. Goddamn corny. I've done it all myself. I'd have fucked him. That's what I'd have done. God damn it. Stanislaus Sabisco would never have done this.
I mean, seriously, that's really the gist of it. He says that he would have taken the belt off Shawn, would have used him to put other guys over, and he would have gotten rid of him too. And of course I don't know that we would have done that. We'll talk about the punishment in a minute, but Meltzer wrote about this as well. And he says that, fans knew in the crowd what was going on. They're chanting, "You sold out." And he gives a complete rundown of what's going on here. But one of the questions that I've always had was, where the hell was Shawn Michaels? I mean, not Shawn Michaels, Sean Waltman.
Rehab.
There you go. Meltzer would write. The other Click member, 123 Kid, wasn't at the show as his future with the company is in somewhat question after he showed up to the Superstars taping on April 30th in no condition to perform and won't be back until June at the earliest. So I guess we should mention the world changes in professional wrestling on May 27th. So just a couple weeks after this, Scott Hall makes a shocking debut on WCW Nitro when he walks through the crowd, walks into the ring, cuts a promo on what's going to be the momentum swinging WCW's direction. Of course, the NWO is right around the corner. A couple of weeks after that, Kevin Nash debuts, and we're off to the races. So let's talk about the fallout of what's left here in the WWF. Shawn says after the incident, Vince was getting a number of phone calls about what happened from other older wrestlers who weren't happy. And quote, what happened was the same thing that happens a lot of times. Vince on the ride to wherever starts getting phone calls. And honestly, it was big to the old timers in the locker room before it was big anywhere else. So Shawn sort of puts the heat on some of the other guys who maybe weren't big fans of the Click or knew that they weren't in line for a push. And maybe they had an axe to grind with Shawn Michaels or Hunter. And they were the ones who really stirred up the shit that it really wasn't a big deal to the crowd or even to Vince. You were really, really close with Vince at the time. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. Vince got delusional calls from people, and older guys or established guys in the business. Some of them weren't even there, I don't think. But a lot of it was, were they really outraged, those guys calling, or were they trying to ingratiate themselves to the chairman?
Right.
I always look, it's sad, God bless Jan. She said one time, I said, she was watching the Miss America show pageant. And I said, well, it's a work, honey. And, oh my God, would you stop that wrestling stuff? Everything's not a work, honey. I said, well, say it. I didn't want to watch the Miss America show, so I was hoping I'd piss her off and we'd change channels, but that didn't happen either. So, but yeah, I think a lot of guys are just trying to kiss ass and ingratiate themselves. Well, I'd never do that to you, Vince. I can hear that conversation. Well, you never have to worry about me on that deal. We all of us know what the Garden means. And that's a true statement too, by the way. The Garden was always considered, as Cornette mentioned, other guys have mentioned. I mean, if you make it there, your career can be defined by how well you do in New York, territory-wise, and specifically in the Garden. Bill Watts just turned 80 this week, and my old mentor, and he can tell you at 80 the matches that he and Bruno had in the Garden. They had 3 of them, and they had the main event in the old Garden, the last wrestling match there, and they were in the main event. Well, he remembers those things. Now, can you imagine how many thousands of matches Cowboy had over the years in different territories, and Gagne and Graham and Atlanta, so forth, his own territory? But he remembers those 3 matches with Bruno in the old Garden and the new Garden as vividly as anything out there, because it was the Garden. And of course, Bruno in the Garden was really the big time deal. That was. You had your program with Bruno. Watts had 3 runs with Bruno. So that Garden was a special place for everybody.
Well, so now we know the Garden is special. A lot of the old timers are taking issue. People are calling Vince. So it feels natural that people would have sort of urged or insisted that someone be punished. Is one of those folks Jim Cornette?
Probably. I would think Corny was, very, we know, you read his quotes, very. You talk about making an emotional investment in an issue. He made a huge emotional investment in the issue, and that's kind of his style. He can be abrasive and coarse, but he's extremely intelligent, and but he's very passionate. And sometimes that passion can be hard to control. But I would think that he would probably be one of them. And Patterson might have been one. If Bruce didn't like something, and he didn't, by his own quotes in that regard, I'm sure Pat felt similar. So, but there are others, we had a lot of older agents, George Animal Steel and Jack Lanza, all those old school guys, Tony Gurria and others that I'm sure felt the same way. I mean, conversations I had with them were like, the old deal, they whisper to you, what's the old man going to do about this deal? I said, I think he's got it under control. He's good, Jack. You're all right. We're all right. Move on. Because you can't harp on it. It's like the wrestlers love to either bitch about their payday, bitch about their travel, bitch about the finish, and they're in the greatest business in the world, and they'll admit that privately. But it's just amazing to me that people continue to look for something to not like, and that may be even more prominent today than then. So, yeah, Cornette was he'd be on the list, no doubt about that.
So Cornette is somebody who's going to talk to Triple H and tell him that he shit on the entire business, so he's going to be punished, because they can't do anything to Shawn Michaels. They're only 2 months into his big WrestleMania title win and run now as champion, and it's been building for 6 or 8 months or more. Hall and Nash are gone. So because Hunter agreed to go out there, now he's going to be punished, and he needs to go apologize to everyone. And he encourages him to go apologize to all the boys in the locker room. And he does. And he even apologizes to Jim Cornette. And years later, he would go on TV, he being Hunter, pronouns pal, when they play some fans camcorder version on Raw, and Hunter says, we were revolutionizing the business, and I don't apologize for that. And Cornette says he never meant it. He was a fucking kiss ass and a suck up then. Now he doesn't need to kiss ass and suck up because he's licking the right crack. So therefore he doesn't need to suck anybody. But the point is, he didn't mean it when he apologized to me. He didn't mean it when he apologized to the boys. And he didn't mean it when he said he was sorry that he exposed the business. But that's Cornette's opinion. When Hunter actually sits down with Vince knows he's got to push some sort of punishment down the line just to appease everybody else in the locker room, maybe set an example, whatever phrase you want to use. And he says something along the lines of, you're going to have to learn to eat shit and like the taste of it. Mm-hmm. So the creative changes. Can you confirm that the original plan for King of the Ring 96 was that Hunter was supposed to be crowned King of the Ring?
As I recall, Triple H was going to be the King of the Ring in that year. I think that, a lot of us saw great upside in him. I thought he was one of our brightest prospects at that point in time because he was smart and durable, had a good look and all that good stuff. Had a real smart head for the business. I've said this, I told this story before. If I had any issues with the Clique, they're late or being uncooperative or whatever. The one that really could always bring that home to their attention in a good way was Triple H. he was easy to talk to in that regard for me. And so that was kind of how I looked at that deal. But yeah, Triple H was looked earmarked to be the guy. And I guess I'm assuming that the grand scale of his punishment, Conrad, came by not winning the King of the Ring. He was still in a tournament, and he put over Jake Roberts, who got a strong win there, who then was set up to put over Stone Cold, which that in booking parlance made a lot of sense. But the bottom line is that I'm not aware of any other quote unquote punishment that Triple H received. I don't recall him his money being affected whatsoever, other than if he was booked down the card, might have affected a little bit. But nonetheless, it wasn't a fine or a suspension or anything like that would take money out of his pocket. But he was scheduled to be the guy. And luckily, as it worked out, Austin got the call.
So of the two C's, as we talked about, the punishment was more creative than cash, and that creative would turn his favor in November. So it's about 6 months. In November, he's going to win the Intercontinental title from Mark Marrow. We'll talk about that another time. Let's talk about the punishment. Vince Russo has been on record as saying that Jim Cornette and Bruce Pritchard both wanted Triple H fired, and he thought it was ridiculous. He felt like it was power trip bullshit, and but they should have business in mind, and he kind of didn't get the tradition of wrestling. Is that fair to say? Because a lot of these old timers think that, oh, you're shitting on the business, but that's because they've been ingrained and brought up that way for decades. And maybe Russo, as an outsider, didn't see it that way. Fair to say?
Absolutely fair to say. And it doesn't make anybody necessarily right or wrong. I can understand guys like Bruce and Corny who were lifers, and they had a certain philosophy in that regard. I shared many of those philosophies at the same time, but I always looked at the big picture, or tried to look at the bigger picture. Okay, so let's say that Triple H made an error in judgment by going out there with his buddies. Let's say that happened, and it was an error in judgment. How long do you pay that price? How long is that penalty? And I felt like that. He got ostracized in the locker room. He had to retrace the steps there and repatch some relationships to some guys. But how many guys you really think in the locker room gave two shits about the time-honored traditions or customs or whatever? They cared about their paycheck. And I don't know. I just think sometimes there's a small pocket of people that made a big deal of the curtain call, when a lot of people in the same company, some in the same locker room, didn't give a shit. It didn't matter. It didn't matter because it didn't affect them in their view. And certainly an argument could be made. I admit. Well, like Davey's comment, you're letting them kill the garden. They're killing the garden. Well, they're not killing the garden. Are you kidding me? And things like that brought to Vince's attention. Vince had to kind of look at that and say, okay, I appreciate your passion, so to speak, but it ain't going to kill the garden. And it didn't kill the garden. So, but I thought to me, it was the fate of this thing and how this thing played out was just almost like a novel. It's almost like a screenplay.
I'm glad you mentioned that, because we should talk about the fallout here. Yes, it means Hunter doesn't win King of the Ring, but that means you guys have to tap somebody else. And you look to a guy who maybe had been underutilized. He hadn't been featured on the show a lot, but you're going to use this as a launch pad to push somebody new instead of Hunter Hearst Helmsley. And the guy chosen is Steve Austin. And Steve Austin, at the end of winning that tournament, stands next to Doc Hendricks. And when that microphone comes in front of his face, Austin 316 is born. The signs show up at Monday Night Raw the next night. You guys take that to the bank with an Austin 316 shirt that is the hottest shirt in history for the company. And he is off to the races. His 97 for Steve Austin is unbelievable. Of course, he closes out 96 with the returning Bret Hart at Survivor Series. They have a barn burner of a match. And by the time the Royal Rumble comes around, he's one of the top stars. And in the featured final four guys, goes on to main event the February pay-per-view, steals the show at WrestleMania 13. And we're off to the races for one of the hottest feuds of the year with Steve Austin, Stone Cold Steve Austin versus the Hart Foundation, Bret and Owen and the like. And he becomes your champion in short order and the hottest star in the business. And I got to ask you, Jim, does any of that happen? Certainly it doesn't happen this way, but would it have happened at all without The curtain call. That's such a weird thing to say, but when you rearrange the pieces, you shuffle the deck. Steve Austin comes out on top of all this, does he not?
He does, very prominently. I can't say that it would have happened in the way that it did, but would it have happened? Absolutely, because the old cliche goes, and I believe it, the cream will always rise to the top. That's why I've said it many years, talents have got to understand it's imperative for them to maximize their minutes. And every time Austin went out to wrestle, it was a sense of urgency as far as his mindset was concerned, because he had finally gotten to WWF and he wasn't going to blow it. So I believe that Austin would have been a success in any event. But as you mentioned, Conrad, it wouldn't have happened in this timeline. It wouldn't have happened in this manner whatsoever. So in that regard, the curtain call was a positive, because how can you say something is not a positive if indeed what you're saying, and I agree with, isn't true, that the curtain call helped facilitate Austin's King of the Ring win, and that King of the Ring win put Austin on the map and put the truck in gear, and off they went. So, so you can't say anything's bad if it helped create the biggest box office sensation for that length of time that the business had ever seen. Without Stone Cold Steve Austin's success, I'm not so sure this company would have gone public as quickly as it did.
All right, JR, we need to take a time out right here and tell everybody where they can catch you on the road. Of course, we've talked about it till we're blue in the face. You're going to be at StarCast in Las Vegas, but you're making the loop, man. You're going to be in a few other spots too.
Yeah, I got some bookings I'm looking forward to. Good friend Dave Hero has got a show up in the Milwaukee area on the 18th of May. I'm doing a little seminar there and a meet and greet. His young son, Cal Hero, is going to be wrestling. He's like 16 or 17 years old. And so I'm looking forward to that. Always good to meet the fans. We're going to bring our sauces and our books and so forth. So good old Raphael will be with me, and we'll make sure that happens on May the 18th near Milwaukee. Check out David Hero on Twitter, and he'll get all the information that you need. And then I'm doing a lot of prep work right now. I was on the talking with our announcers yesterday, and so we're planning on making a splash as best we can. We know the eyes and ears will be on us, people waiting for us to make a mistake or two or three. That will happen, quite frankly, because we're human. But there'll be no lack of effort or excitement or genuine organic passion on the 25th of May, when we are part of the Double or Nothing broadcast team. Can't tell you how excited I am. To me, my mental state is, this will be my WrestleMania this year. The 25th of May, Las Vegas, after all the great stuff Conrad's booked, the roasts, the Q&As, all that good stuff, to be able to sit back and call the matches like I did for years is something I'm extremely excited about. So I hope you guys will check that out, and you'll be informed soon about how you can see that on pay-per-view and all that good stuff. So, Conrad, I enjoy meeting the fans. It's still fun to me, and I appreciate the opportunity to talk about here on our show a little bit. But we'll keep everybody posted where I'm going, and you can follow me on Twitter at JRsBBQ, and I'll generally have plenty of information on that for what's shaking.
It's so amazing when you really think about everything that changed in wrestling. People think that, Hall and Nash leaving to create the NWO, certainly was the match that lit the wrestling business on fire, but Stone Cold Steve Austin poured gasoline over the whole thing. And none of that would have maybe happened had it not been for the curtain call, which is why I think people are still talking about it. Of course, in July of '96, Hulk Hogan turns heel for the first time, becomes the ultimate bad guy, and joins the NWO. The business is forever changed, and you guys find yourself in an unfamiliar spot. Instead of leading, now you're trying to play catch up ball. So now we'll pivot to the other side of the story. You see Hulk Hogan as a bad guy. It's getting over like crazy. The WWF is maybe sucking hind teat, and somebody along the way says, well, hey, if those guys are so over, why don't we just bring them back? And allegedly, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but Bruce Pritchard has said that this was actually the WWE attorney's idea. You were there. What can you speak about this? Was this Jerry McDevitt's idea that, hey, you guys own the IP. Why don't you just make somebody else Razor Ramon and Diesel?
I can see that happening. McDevitt's the best lawyer I've ever been around in my life. The battling barrister, I always called him. Hell of a mind, boy. He's something else. A Pittsburgh guy. And him and my wife are buddies, and his wife, so forth. All good stuff. But he was right about the IP. The idea sucked. It was ridiculous. And it was knee jerk. Do we think it through? And as a former booker and someone that did this, you figure out, how can we monetize this piece of creative to make us money? How can we monetize this? And unfortunately, that was never considered, seemingly, because anybody that actually believed that the fake Razor and Diesel were going to draw money they're on hallucinogenics, I guess the word is, whatever it is. They're smoking the damn. They got the chocolate cake in double big piece, because it just didn't make any sense. It was never going to happen. So, and I think that I don't think that did Russo any favors either. So that wasn't a great idea.
Are you saying that Russo was involved in the booking when this happened?
Wasn't he in the creative?
I don't know that he was by September of '96. This feels pre-Russo to me.
Okay, well, maybe it was, but bottom line is that then why, I don't know how Russo would have a say if he wasn't involved in creative, because at that time he was working in publications, I think.
That's right. He was working on the magazine, and he had started to appear a little bit as Vic Venom on the Livewire show that you guys were doing on USA. So chat me up are you in the booking meeting, or do you just show up to Raw and they say, okay, Jim, here's what we got you doing today?
No, I'm in the meeting, and I think it was, I don't know. I've always wondered why those decisions were made. I thought that, I was very, very content to continue to improve as a broadcaster and to hopefully earn more significant minutes on the TV doing my work as to what I came there to do. And then it was given to me that this is, what we're going to do, and you're going to be the guy. And I was never told. I thought I was going to become like a heel announcer, but I never got the discussion I was going to become a manager, because that was never in my plan whatsoever, because I didn't think I'd be good at it. And I didn't, why use me when you got other guys that are much better that you could use? But nonetheless, the idea was, I could see that idea coming from non-wrestling people.
So let's talk about, why they would have tried it. I guess we should mention there were weeks in '96 and the second half of '96 here where Nitro was winning 3.6, to Raw's 1.6. And there was another week where it was 3.1 to 1.5. So fans are certainly liking a more reality based product, got the NWO breaking into the WCW production truck versus, some over the top, maybe silly cartoon characters for the WWF presentation. So you guys decide to turn good old JR heel and bring back Razor and Diesel, and you tag, I guess his name is Rick Bogner, to be Razor Ramon, and Glenn Jacobs, the former Isaac Yankem DDS, to be Diesel. I think the protocol here is we get their gear made and we send them some tapes and say, learn to do these moves and mannerisms. Do you guys do a walkthrough, or is really the first time anybody sees this live on Raw?
I think Cornette did some work with those guys about Glenn's or Diesel's mannerisms and so forth. And Corny had a long history with Glenn Jacobs, who we hired. I went to Smoky Mountain. I saw him in Smoky Mountain. I was doing some commentary for Cornette at that time while I was with WWE. So he was like a no-brainer to sign. I was completely unaware who Rick Bogner was. And don't mind saying it. It wasn't just on knock on the dude. Canadian cat. I know that. which don't make him bad or good, just makes him, he's Canadian. So I wasn't around him. I didn't know him well, but he had at a distance, when prepared for television, he had little razor tendencies. And of course, Glenn had that near 7 foot frame as Kevin Nash did. So that's kind of how that worked out. And we weren't really, Dr. Yankin was never going to draw any money. It's another stupid gimmick. It made no sense. It's eye rolling. Nobody could attach to it because they didn't want to be embarrassed that they're a fan of something so bad. And it wasn't Glenn's fault. The gimmick was bad. So, yeah, I don't know if I don't think we did a walkthrough. I might have walked through. I can tell you how my walkthrough went. The night before, I did the promo in Hershey, introducing these guys or doing my heel promo thing. I rode from Philly to Hershey with Jerry Briscoe in a sleet ice storm. And my Native American compadre was not really happy driving on the ice, and I would have been less happy. But all the way there, from Philly in slow traffic, I recited that promo. And it wasn't, I had bullet points, and I started putting all the sentences together. So when I got to TV, I had the promo down. And so I was confident I was going to be able to do that. And I was excited about it because it was something new. Again, thinking if I was still going to go back to the commentary booth, I was going to be a little bit more edgy, so forth, so on. It was all fine. But some of the things I said in the promo got cheered.
Yeah, they did.
So I don't know. It's like swimming upstream. I didn't mind trying it, but I sure as hell had no envisions whatsoever of becoming a quote unquote heel manager. You know, I'm not Jim Cornette or Bobby Heenan or Gary Hart or any of those great ones, you know, just not. That's not my skill set. And so I didn't feel good about stepping into that world, but that hadn't really been determined.
I guess we should mention that in the middle of all this, between the curtain call and now, the WWF had sued WCW for them portraying that these guys were really invading WCW from the WWF. And Scott Hall was using a lot of his old Razor Ramon mannerisms, and they're being portrayed as characters from the WWF. So there is an ongoing lawsuit. And then on the September 6th edition of Raw, which I believe was on a Friday night, you said that we're breaking the biggest story of all right now. And it's that Big Daddy Cool Diesel and the bad guy Razor Ramon are on their way back. And I have that on good authority from very reliable sources. And Kevin Kelly is saying that's unbelievable news and what a huge story it would be. And later in the show, you reiterate, when you've been in the business as long as I have, there are some sources you really rely on. And they tell me Diesel and Razor Ramon are on their way back. And of course that gets WCW panicked a little bit because at this point, according to Scott Hall and Kevin Nash, they're still working on what they call deal memos, not actual contracts. So they offer the guys a bump in pay. Now, Eric Bischoff denies that, but both Scott Hall and Kevin Nash say when you did this angle, they got a bump in pay. And you even go on your hotline and say that, you know, I am steadfast in my story and my sources. I do know negotiations between Razor and Diesel and their representatives, more specifically, and representatives of the WWF are ongoing this week. And you're trying to keep people abreast of the situation. And it's even the lead story on the WWF's America Online site. And Vince McMahon is asking you to apologize for that statement, but you're still milking it. And you're going to do that in your big speech on November 23rd in Hershey. On September 9th, though, Bischoff does a Prodigy chat and tells fans, hey, they're under contract and they're not going anywhere. Of course, we know the story. It's going to be an interesting promo from you. It gets a lot of attention. Jim Cornette has worked with these guys, and in the process of getting them ready, loses even more respect for Diesel and says that Diesel has fucking 6 moves if you count the hair flip, 5 if you don't.
God. That's cold, boy.
And he says it's going to be easy for these guys to portray the character. Scott Hall has been on record as saying he took no issue with Rick Bogner portraying the Razor Ramon character. He just wishes he would have called him so he could have sold him some of his old Razor Ramon gear. which is kind of funny. And of
Yeah,
course,
it
we
is.
know it really worked out for Glenn Jacobs. This fake Diesel character is not long for this world. But fast forward to October 97, and he's going to become Kane, and he's off to the races. The promo, though, is really something else. It comes one day after that In Your House Mind Games pay-per-view on September 22nd. You're going to be in the middle of the ring, and you're going to talk about how Vince McMahon has fired your ass, and you have no loyalty to the WWF. Your only loyalty is to you. And it's because you left a great job in Atlanta where you were working with the National Football League and the Atlanta Falcons and another wrestling organization. But now you wanted to be here, the recognized leader, and they made you debut at WrestleMania 9 in a sheet. And, and then you talked about how you'd been fired before and how much you hated living in Stamford, Connecticut. And here you go. I want to bring back one of your favorites. Here's the bad guy, Razor Ramon. A really, really good promo from you, though. What did Vince think of your promo?
He loved it. He loved it. And the irony of that promo, I think it's still the delivery and the tone, tenor, etc., still would hold up today, but it was not written by writers. It wasn't written by somebody disconnected from me, or the person delivering the interview, in this case, myself. It was my guts and, reciting this promo over and over ad nauseum to poor ass Jerry Briscoe on that sleet-filled ride from Philly to Hershey. It clicked. But it goes to show you that if you give somebody that's got some skill, bullet points and the right motivation, they can do better themselves than somebody writing for them in a more sterile environment, which is kind of what I see scripted promos being. So, but yeah, Vince liked it, and he didn't hear it. He had never heard the promo until I did it. And the one that really it resonated to was Monsoon, who I love like a father, because that was part of the deal. Was I was going to start being an asshole to Monsoon. And I said, man, that's what we are to do. But you got to remember, hey, you're playing a character. It's fiction. Do your thing the best of your ability and call it a day. And that's what we did. So, but Vince liked the promo. It got over well. I can only imagine how it would have played at this point in our lives, Conrad, with social media as it is. That promo would have been probably considered bigger than it was even then if it had the juice that we have now on social media. But it was good. I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the departure of doing something different. I just didn't want to become a manager.
I guess we should mention that in this promo, you out Vince McMahon as being the owner, which has never even been really acknowledged on the show up until this point. But here you're very clear that he's the owner, and it does feel real. It feels like you've pulled the curtain back a little bit, and it feels real because a lot of it is. I mean, you told the truth in your promo, but you made the reality fit the fiction. Of course, Razor and Diesel don't get over, and this doesn't last long. I guess the highlight of their run is the In Your House 12 pay-per-view. They challenge Owen and Bulldog for the tag titles. Of course, thankfully, Owen and Bulldog won. Bogner makes one last pay-per-view appearance, the Royal Rumble 97. He's the first guy eliminated from the match, and he's not seen again on TV. And as we said, Glenn got repackaged.
Connie, it's ironic here on this, at this moment in our conversation this week, that the curtain call, indirectly helped everybody discover the Stone Cold Steve Austin character. The curtain call, as it would play out, helped Glenn Jacobs get rid of Dr. Yankum, have a stop off as the phony Diesel. But more importantly, it took him to Kane. And Kane became one of the longest running main event stars in the history of the company. So when you go back and say look at all the damage that happened in the Garden. Well, first of all, we know the Garden wasn't killed. Business continued. It helped create a new atmosphere, a new attitude for WWE. And just in the sense of two guys, Steve Austin and Kane, they were byproducts of that chaos. That's not a bad, that's kind of a win to me. So the curtain call was what it was. Unsavory to some, I get it. But God Almighty, I don't know that But the fact that we could get Austin and Kane both out of that scenario, squeeze that out of the fruit, pretty damn good.
Yeah, pretty good for maybe everyone except Rick Bachner. I guess we should mention that.
Right. Well, correct. You're right. You're right. No, you're right about that.
He's done after this one last shot at the Royal Rumble. His contract is going to expire. He had a 1-year deal. And then after that, he goes back to New Japan, where he's going to be wrestling as Big Titan or Rick Titan. And he has a funny story where he says, Vince was sort of famous for whenever, he hired a new guy on, he would give employees and staff members and wrestlers his home number and say, listen, call me anytime, day or night with questions. And so when Rick hadn't been booked in a few weeks, he calls Vince at home one day to see what's up. And when Vince answers, allegedly, he says, Rick, don't ever call me at home again, and hangs up, which I think is fucking hilarious.
Yeah. I never knew about the Vince passing out his phone number story, until I read it on our notes, but it didn't sound like him, quite frankly. I mean, but I don't know. Rick's got a story, and if that happened, it happened. But I can see it happening both ways. I would never understand why Vince would give everybody his home phone number when because here's the deal, he was probably at the office more than he was at home, so your chances of catching him at home are, like you said, maybe on a Sunday afternoon type thing, but nonetheless, I can see Bogner's reason for calling too. He just faded away, man. He just faded away. And it wasn't a bad hand. It wasn't a bad hand at all. I'm trying to figure out how we got him. He may have been a recommendation from the Hearts. I'm not sure, because I think he had ties to the Calgary territory at one time, but I may be wrong about that too.
Let's go to Twitter. We asked you guys, hey, do you have a question? We would love to take your questions here on the show. And I guess we'll talk about what we're doing next week in a minute. But what you need to know is JR Grilling is where you can find us on Twitter. That's our official show account, JR Grilling, at JR Grilling. So check it out on Twitter. Throw us a follow there. We did one last poll on my account this week. We'll talk about that in a minute. But if you want to vote in the next poll, you need to follow us on Twitter at JR Grilling. Quick question here from Brian Breaker. The introduction of Fake Razor was on Raw, and that was the day I started to prefer WCW to the WWF. In my opinion, it's the worst move creatively the WWF made during this time. Did JR realize it was going to be such a stink bomb when he was first handed the creative for this?
Yeah, I'm stink worthy. I exactly knew what was going to happen. It was, look, in the annals of pro wrestling, it's like, I'll give you an old school, I'll give you two examples real quick. One was when Snuka left WWF at one point, and I remember the company brought in another Islander named Sifi Afi to make him the next Snuka. It failed miserably. He looked good, but nobody. If you're going to give me a Polynesian Superman, I want Snuka. I don't want a guy that looks like Snuka, that smells like Snuka, that acts like Snuka, because he ain't Snuka. Same thing when JYD left Mid-South. Cowboy was hell-bent on auditioning, booking every available black star he could find to see who was going to replace Dog, because it had to be another African-American. And I always thought that was a mistake. And the irony of that whole deal, we tried, Brickhouse Brown and, gosh, all kinds of guys. I mean, seriously, all kinds of guys. Pork Chop Cash, tons of guys. But nonetheless, it didn't work. And we had the guy on a roster already there named Hacksaw Butch Reed that could have stepped in and taken Dog's place if that's where you wanted to go seamlessly. But in any event, those copycat things just rarely work. The fans realize, especially today, it's just it's lazy booking. You're not creating something new. You're just trying to recreate something old. And more often than not, that don't work.
Lacan wants to know, was there anyone else who was considered to play the parts of Diesel and Razor, but it just didn't work out?
No, I don't think so. I don't remember anybody, quote unquote, auditioning or being considered. I'm sure there probably was, but a lot of it was the look thing. They had to have the physical appearance as best we could get. And Glenn fit the mold for Diesel perfectly because of the size and all that we talked about. And then, like I mentioned earlier, Bogner, if you're glancing, Bogner had some physical traits that he shared with Scott Hall. So, I don't think anybody else, I can't remember anybody else in the hunt for that. And Bogner needed a job, so he didn't question it. And Glenn Jacobs is just the ultimate team player. So if he had issues, speaking of Glenn, he kept them to himself. And again, it led to something much bigger and better for him anyway, because we knew that Glenn was a team guy. You could rely on him. Big trait when you're talking about talent. Can I rely on you? And Glenn Jacobs the answer was always a very prominent yes, absolutely. So, but normally this copycat shit just don't work.
Fenton Riley wants to know, my question is, if Hall and Nash had stuck around and never made the jump to WCW, do you think the Clique would have ever become an on-screen stable like the NWO or DX did later?
Absolutely. Those guys, whether you liked them or you don't like them, to this day or that day, they found lightning in a bottle, and they found something that worked, whether it was their organic vision, and we knew it all along how great it was going to be. I don't know that, but I do know that they had great chemistry. They were organic, and what I saw on TV was what I normally saw in a very similar incarnation in the locker room area. So, I think, and look, that was kind of some of the things that I was thinking about and others have talked about. We got to change how we're presenting our product with some new stars, new faces, give some guys some new opportunities to carry the ball. So, but I think that to me, it would have been a layup as far as them becoming a faction in WWF at that time. And they would have been very, very good at it too. All those four guys together, Waltman included out of his rehab deal. We just try to take care of Sean. Sean Waltman is one of the most beloved guys in the business. And I think you look at him as a little brother or something. He's the famous guy that called me one night and said, "God damn it, I know I was getting paid by the pound," because he was the smallest guy in some of these matches. He thought his payoff was a little low, but that's nothing, neither here nor there.
Here's a fun question. We've talked about this a lot today, but here's another comparison. Stephen Flynn wants to know, what was the more important accident for the company? The curtain call, which created Austin 316, or Montreal, which created Mr. McMahon?
Well, man, that's a hard one to say. You can't have peanut butter and jelly without both peanut butter and jelly. And Austin had to find the perfect foil to work with. And Vince became the most significant heel in the entire Attitude Era for WWE, without a doubt. Not even close, in my view. So it's kind of hard to say. I would have to say discovering Austin first would be number one, and 1A would be the Montreal Screwjob, where Vince became discovered he was an amazing heel when he's not at the gorilla position or announcing. And so I think the Austin thing's first, but certainly right there with it was the guy that he danced with and drew all that money with and created all the success. And that would be Vince. Vince is an amazing heel. He loved doing it. He loved being it. And to the point where even today, the Mr. McMahon character, people actually believe that Vince in real life is that guy. And that's not accurate.
One last question, and then we'll talk about what we're doing next week. This one comes to us from the Downturn podcast. Did JR enjoy portraying a heel on TV? I thought he was damn entertaining. How do you like that one, McMahon?
Yeah. Oh God. Well, it's, I was a little defiant and awful. As he told me one time, he says, "God damn, you're full of yourself, aren't you?" Yeah, I am. It was fun. It was a nice, it's like going on a vacation and spending one day at Disneyland standing in the lines. It's kind of cool to do it once. But it wouldn't be something I'd want to do every weekend. And that's kind of how I looked at being a heel. My point was always the same. I thought my skill set was best qualified to be a broadcaster and not a manager or a bump taking character. I sure as hell didn't want to get into that business. But it was fun for a short time, but it was hard to determine how much fun it was going to be because I wasn't sure where it was going to go, Conrad. I didn't know what's the end game here? And that's the big issue I'd have. My biggest bitch would be, what is our end game here? To me, it was just to confuse the marketplace a little bit, to, make our statement that we're not taking this lying down type thing, and we own the intellectual property. How many wrestling fans even know what IP means? I didn't know I was in the wrestling industry for years, didn't know what IP meant.
Right.
It didn't matter. So I think that the heel thing was a fun departure, but what was the big picture? That's going back and talking about the punishment of Triple H. What is our big picture here? We got a young guy that's 6'4", that's in great shape, has a student of the game. He doesn't drink. He doesn't smoke. He's no drugs. So why would we forsake those traits to, quote unquote, take somebody to the woodshed for their punishment? Punishment was doled out, and we move on. But that firing this and taking the belt off Sean and all these atrocities, I just didn't agree with the severity of the atrocities and how it related to terminating careers. Because here's the thing. If Shawn Michaels had been fired or taken the title off of him, where's he going to go? We know where he's going. He's going down with his buddies. And now what they're getting is arguably at that time, one of the top two in-ring performers in the history of the business. So you're going to give that to him? You get rid of the young guy, Triple H. You're going to have your top star in the world, one of the greatest workers, next to Rick, the Nate. They're head 1 and 1A, depending on your preference. So that didn't make any sense in the big picture. So I think that some of those decisions were made out of anger and frustration and not out of thought and thinking things through. How is this going to help us down the road? And that's always got to be your vision when you're a booker or something along those lines. How are we paying this off? And what is our end game? Well, I don't know. We're not there yet. Well, bullshit. And that's a lot of wrestling that way these days. The lack of long-term planning is seen very prominently on television every single week.
Well, and we appreciate you tuning in to Grilling JR every single week. Every Thursday at 6 a.m. You can count on good old JR and myself to be here. And we let you guys sort of drive the ship a little bit. We did a poll, and JR leaving WCW to join the WWF won. That's what we did last week. And we put a poll up this week, and it's still active right now. You can vote on my Twitter at @HeyHeyIt'sConrad. So if you'd like to vote, please cruise over to @HeyHeyIt'sConrad. As we're taping right now, In Your House 8, Beware of Dog has a sizable lead. That is the next pay-per-view after the curtain call. It is the one where the building famously lost power midstream, and they had to do the show again on Tuesday. JR was doing commentary on the Tuesday show. So the story of how the WWF lost power mid pay-per-view and all the fallout is probably what we'll be covering. But if you're an old school fan, the poll is still live right now with Wrestle War 1989, which is the famous match number 3 between Ric Flair and Ricky Steamboat from Nashville, Tennessee. Of course, the post-match angle with Terry Funk trying to pile drive Ric Flair through the table, and they were off to the races for the rest of 89. 90 brought us Capital Combat, which is also on the poll. I can't believe this is not winning. RoboCop was here. I can't believe that's real, but fucking RoboCop is on the poll. Yeah, exactly. See, the bad topics make good shows.
Yeah.
Wrestle War 92 is one of the more famous war games ever. It's Sting Squadron against the Dangerous Alliance in a war games. That right now is in 3rd place, but you can still vote at @HeyHeyIt'sConrad. Next week, and every week after, we'll be asking questions, at our show account, which is JR Grilling at JR Grilling. And I want to tell you what's coming up here on the show. Obviously on the 16th, we're going to be covering whatever wins the poll. But the following week on the 23rd, we're going to cover Over the Edge 1999. This is the night where we tragically lost, Owen Hart. That is the 20-year anniversary of the show. So we'll be covering that one. On May 30th, we'll cover whatever came in second on the poll that we're running right now. So right now, if this trues up, we are going to get to cover RoboCop on the 30th. We're going to put up a new poll towards the end of May, and we'll have Jake Roberts, Vince Russo, Randy Savage, and Dusty Rhodes on that poll. We'll do a personality profile for the first time here on the show. On the 13th of June, we're going to cover the Clash of the Champions 7 which has a lot of meat on the bone. We've got the Dynamic Dudes. We've got the Ding Dongs. We've got Norman the Lunatic, and we've got a main event with Steamboat and Terry Funk. And of course, one of your favorites, Dr. Death, is in there with Bam Bam Gordy. On June 20th, we're going to cover the 2008 WWE draft. And you may not remember that, but I'm sure JR does. That's the day he found out he was going to SmackDown and no one smartened him up. That should be a fun show. And then on June 27th, what everybody's wanted to hear since we first announced the show, King of the Ring, 1998. You reckon you had a famous call at that show? I don't know.
Might have had something come out there that worked.
Well, we appreciate you guys working with us this week. Follow us on Twitter. He is at JR's BBQ on Twitter. I am at Hey, it's Conrad. But what we really need is your support on the show account. Go follow us there. You'll get all the updates. We want to give a special shout out to Mr. Dave Silva for his incredible graphics that make us look fun every week and all of his support. And we hope you guys will support us when we come see you in Las Vegas for StarCast. It might be the last JR and the King live ever. Obviously they're on different sides of the battlefield now, and we'll get that event kicked off 4 days in Las Vegas, Memorial Day weekend, with JR on stage with two of the all-time greats, Ricky the Dragon Steamboat and Ric Flair, where they'll revisit one of their famous matches from 1989. StarCast is shaping up, man. It's going to be a lot of fun, isn't it, Jim?
Absolutely. I look at this in amazement as someone that's put wrestlers' names on paper and booked. You know, what you've done there is the accumulating the depth of talents that are going to be on hand is unparalleled. If you are a wrestling fan, you need to get your ass to Vegas and join us and have a lot of fun. Memorial Day weekend, a week. But Conrad, that's not the only way. Somebody says, well, that's easy for you to say, JR. I got 3 kids, a job, and I'm working part-time in another one. I don't have the time or the money to get to Vegas. There's something we can fix that, right?
That's exactly right. StarCastOnFight.com. You can get all these shows in glorious HD, both live and on demand with unlimited replays. So you don't have to actually be in front of the TV that weekend. If you want to go to the lake, no problem. It'll be there when you get home. Check it out. It's StarCastOnFight.com. It's nearly 24 shows, nearly 40 hours of content for just $59 with unlimited replays. And don't forget the crown jewel of the entire weekend. It's the roast of Ric Flair. See the full lineup of everything that's going on right now at StarCastOnFight.com. And don't forget to tell your friends about the brand new format here on the show. And I do want to throw this out there. I know we've got a lot of our fans who are saying, hey, I really wish JR could still do What's on My Mind. Hey, I really wish we could talk about, the different segments that he had before. Maybe it's the Pet Coon Goofy Award or, whatever. If you like all that stuff, we are working on a strategy right now behind the scenes to get you a little more content. And JR, I hadn't even told you this, but I made a little bit of headway. I think I'm working on it. I don't have it all the way locked in, but I might be about to acquire all of your old radio shows from Atlanta back in the day.
Oh, cool. And that's some good stuff, man. Calls from, we were way ahead of our time there and didn't even know it. But that's great because Dennis Brent was, he recorded all those shows, and I don't have any of them. Pardon me, I don't have any of them. But I know Dennis has shared those with me. If you're a fan of nostalgia in pro wrestling from that era, you're going to love these shows. So hopefully, that's good news, Conrad. You're breaking news to me, and I love it.
Well, we want to continue to build an ecosystem for you guys to enjoy, working with each other fans. We've been able to do that with some of our other shows. There's little communities that really follow Tony Schiavone now and Bruce Pritchard, and we're going to get that going for JR here before you know it. But tune in next week, and if you haven't already, go vote in the poll. Let's find out what you want to hear. But if you don't hurry, you're going to hear In Your House 8, Beware of Dog. And what a show that was with no power, but we've got the power to tell you to leave us a review, hit the subscribe button, and tell a friend about the brand new format here with good old JR. It's called Grilling JR every Thursday at 6 a.m. Eastern. We'll see you next week right here on Westwood One.
Hey, it's Conrad Thompson. Thanks for checking out the podcast here on YouTube. Be sure to hit the subscribe button and the notifications bell so you get a notice anytime we upload some new content. And go save yourself some money right now. If you're in a 30-year loan or you have credit card debt, it's not a matter of if I can save you money. It's a matter of how much. Find out right now for free at SaveWithConrad.com.